business. Every second year, SASPA has a tradition of running a session such as this, where we try and provide some insight into what can be quite an intriguing process in our system, which is the merit selection process. I'm sure that you've all had some sort of experience in this already, but what we find useful about holding this event is that we get a chance to dig a bit deeper and we get to hear other people's perspectives, their experiences, and also some hints that might help people navigate through this process. So it's a huge thank you to our 4 panel members tonight to come along and share with us some of those tips into the process, and a chance for you guys to have ask some questions, talk amongst yourselves to really share your experiences in that regard. But they're not going to be any, what do you call it? Not any, here's a surefire way to get through this process, okay? Because there's nothing like that that's going to happen. But it is really helpful, I think, to have a bit more of an understanding about the various stages of our process. So what you'll see on your table are those processes outlined on a sheet that we thought might be useful for you to capture some thinking from our panel members, but also you might have some questions that you specifically would like to pose to our panel members during the course of the evening. The structure we have this afternoon is that we've just asked the panel not to prepare any presentation, but we're going to go basically one by one through here. What are your tips? What are your experiences? What will be your insights into these aspects of the merit selection process? And to do that, we've invited along a country principal, Sonia Pringle from Balaklava High School. Welcome, Sonia, and thank you so much for making the time to get on. We've also had a deputy principal, Craig Duguid from Hallett Cove School.
That's right. Thank you, Jan.
Which is an R to 12 school. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Anthony Van Ruiten, who's the principal from Willunga High School. And a late entry, Neil White. Thank you so much.
Couldn't find anyone else. So
we had a late withdrawal from our panel due to illness, and Neil has really adjusted your day. So thank you so much. Neil is the Education Director for, is it Gawler?
Gawler 2.
Gawler 2, and we really appreciate you coming along. You've been a long time supporter of SASPA, and yet again you proved that strong support by being here this afternoon. So you can see there's an opportunity here for you to get some real insight from a range of perspectives, but also if there's anything that you really want to ask, I'm sure the panel is comfortable with hearing your questions. We don't necessarily going to have all the answers to this, but there might be some things that we take away and get back to you on. Yeah. We're also strongly committed as an association to opening up and being as accessible as possible for these events for our members across the state. And so we are filming this afternoon so that we can make that available, not only for those people that are keen to hear about what we discussed, but also if you yourself want to go back and have another look, it'll be available for you on our website. That's right, Andy, isn't it? It's going to be on our website, yeah? Okay, so without further ado, do I need to say the toilets down here? If there's a fire alarm out here and head right, probably I've covered everything now, I think. Good. All right, so let's get started. The process of merit selection is the focus of our discussion this afternoon. It's quite unique, it's very special for the Department for Education. It's been around for quite a long time, and so it's quite entrenched in our processes. There's a number of different steps that you would be very well aware that you undertake when a position becomes available that you're interested in. The first one we thought was really important is around researching the position, getting a better understanding about what the position is all about, to see whether or not it's something that you want to put your time and energy in. Because let's not kid ourselves here. We're talking about significant amount of time that you and the panel members put into this process. I would not be underestimating, I think, if I was to say 20 to 30 hours would be average, if not minimum, that people would commit to preparing to be involved in this process, particularly the first time through. So, researching the position is likely to save you some time, yeah? So, I don't know, do you want to go along the panel here, or we'll start.
Sure.
Sonia. Okay, what insights and tips would you like to share with us?
So researching the position, something that I have had on my phone as a note since 2018, I think, is questions to ask when ringing for a principal job. That's what it's titled. So one of the things that I would definitely do for any, whatever level it is ring the person whose name is on there. So if it says further information, ring Sonia Pringle, Neil White, whoever, ring them, have a chat. So this was passed on to me and I have saved it because it's the most useful thing I've had. So when you ring, the advice is 1 minute background about yourself, and so they understand your context, where you're coming from, what you've done up to this point. Just to give a bit of context for them, and then ask about what are the strengths of the school. As the person who is responsible for that panel, they will know. So what are the strengths of the school? What are the challenges? Another one is have a look at the external review, and then, I notice in the review, these were the recommendations. How's that going? You're just really using them as a source to give you a bit of insight. So when you get to writing your application, you know what they're looking for. School culture is always something to ask about. And then finally, anything else? Is there anything else you think I should know about this school before I apply? And so they would be my tips. Like I said, they were passed on to me and I have finessed them a little bit. But one of the biggest resources in researching for the school is the person listed there. So I would definitely advise that. And then also when you apply for the job, they go, oh, that's right.
Yep.
I remember. She rang. And,
Yep.
So that would be my tip.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah, I had written a note about being specific in contacting the chairperson of the panel. So it's obvious when someone contacts and is really just wanting you to know their name and that's it, without going beyond that. So just to support or reinforce, I guess, what Sonia said there about being specific and asking things that are connected to the role. It's also really important, obviously, to show effusive without going over the top, but being really pleased about applying for the job and looking forward to that and being really excited about the opportunity. Because I have received phone calls in the past with people, I reckon they know they have to call, but they don't. That's about it. They haven't really thought about what they're going to do when they call. So that on that point, just to support the things that Sonia said there as well. The school context is important, of course, and you've got to want the job. So if you research a position and you don't think that it's a good fit, then that's a pretty good signal to maybe move away towards something else, because that becomes obviously really apparent throughout the process if someone doesn't really want the job and they know they're just doing it because they have to do it. So yeah, really want the job, of course, it goes without saying. The sources of information on the school website was one of the other things I wrote down, and the key docs that Sonia's referred to there, like this external school review pages and summaries, and so you can get some insight about directions for the school and connect that through your application interview process. And also school improvement plans that might be available and things that the school is working on that you may have done and that you can reinforce or connect to as well. So connecting to the school context through freely available information on school websites. When you write an application, then you get the chance to talk about things you've seen on the website as well and contextualise the application for the actual position. So those are things I was thinking about.
Great. Thank you, Craig. Anthony, do anything to add?
I think there's a bit of an urban myth out there that schools don't want you to ring them because they're busy. And I think it's really important that you ignore the urban myth, because I know that some people have been, have shared with me that they've been given the advice is, don't ring because I don't want to be pestered by you. I think it's really important in terms of you deciding whether the school's the right fit for you, and it has to be the right fit for you, that you make the phone calls, either to the panel chair or to the principal, or or to a friend who works at the school, or do some research around the school and how that school works. Make sure it's the right fit for you. I would personally, I would never apply for a school that I desperately didn't want to go to and that I didn't think I could contribute to. So I think it's really important that leadership jobs are hard, and so you actually need to be really really sure that that's the job you want. I think all the questions are really important. Personally, I look at the curriculum statements, like so the subject selection curriculum guidelines, because that gives me a really strong sense of the purpose of the school and the priorities of the school and the organisation of the school. Because if the curriculum documents are messy and there's not pathways, this is my perspective, it's not messy and there's not pathways, and it doesn't look like there's a supportive structure for kids to move through the school, then the rest of the school around it probably is a little bit messy and not as well organised. You can go to that school and make that change, which is stuff that you do as if you're applying for principals' jobs. But then it's also, you need to go with your eyes open, going, well, this is what I'm going to step into. Am I going to be able to contribute to that? Am I going to be able to help the improvement in that place? So that's where, because the kids are the bottom line, I think that's where, for me, it sits. You can look at the SIPs and annual reports and all those sorts of things, which gives you the NAPLAN and the PAT and that sort of improvement in that space, which I think are also important, but also gives you a sense of what the challenges are in that space as well. So that's where my head's at.
Right. Thank you, Anthony.
Back up everything that people have said. I think there's a danger in asking if it's a real position. So I get phone calls sometimes that say, is this a real position, or have you got someone in there and you're just going through the motion? So that's a bit insulting to the chairperson of the panel. So I would avoid that. If you want to know that situation, I'd be doing the research somewhere else in a more subtle fashion. Wouldn't do it to the chairperson. And I would reaffirm, I think the chairperson does want to hear from people that are interested, but they don't want to spend 15 or 20 minutes on the phone to every single person. So be really precise and clear around the questions that you want to ask. And remember that the chairperson is a member of that school and is probably really proud of their school. Be careful about making any kind of comment that might be considered derogatory. And if you finish up with oh, well, thank you very much, that sounds fantastic, and I'm really excited about the opportunity of joining you, it just leaves a positive taste in the end.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So let's just check, are there any questions or thoughts or reflections around the room? Any questions?
Would you go as far as visible to the school instead of making a phone call? Or would that be taken too far?
It's difficult for the people to find the time and space if you just drop in. I would make the call and say, is it okay to visit? And they may say, well, I'm busy, I'm sorry, or come on in. It'll depend on individuals, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't turn up. I wouldn't just turn up.
Definitely.
Don't turn up unannounced, because that's
Yeah.
Probably not what you were thinking, was it?
No.
You'd obviously make a phone call and suggest maybe.
But it's not unreasonable to ask.
No, not at all.
You'd have to be thinking about what the purpose of the visit is and how you think it would add value to the process, I reckon. If a potential contract teacher rocks up and says, I'm here and this is me and I'm keen, that's really important at that level. I don't know if that's the right word, but in that context, that's really important to me. If a teacher turns up and shows enough interest to come to the school and say, here I am, rather than just send me their resume, then I'm really keen on that. I think it's different if you're applying in a more senior role, executive role in a school. I think you have to think about that carefully, I reckon.
Yeah. I certainly think do the drive though.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, visit the store.
Yeah.
Talk more about that. What do you mean do the drive?
When I knew that my school was coming up, I made sure that the drive wasn't going to take me 2 hours.
Okay.
because I live 50k away from the school, right? So,
I was thinking about it differently. You go.
But I think people, particularly in Adelaide, don't like driving very far. And it's a bit of a it's a little bit of a frustration when you think about you compare us to Sydney or other places where you drive the same distance and it take you 4 times as long. But you need to be able to sit in the car and not be stressed when you arrive at work and not be stressed when you get home, because those two endpoints are really important. And I think if you're comfortable in that space, then it makes your work life a bit easier, regardless of how long it is. My trip's 40, 45, 50 minutes, but it's a really important headspace time for me in the morning and a really important de-stress time for me in the evening. So it depends on how you work, of course, but do the drive.
You know, I look around this room and I know there are people that drive 45, 1 hour, to get to work. So it is very much a personal thing. So whatever you're prepared to put in, is something to think about. But Craig,
I was thinking about. I've got a question.
Sometimes it's the opposite as well, that you don't live too close to the school, so that students and families aren't in your life, and
Depends,
you have
sometimes.
a sick day.
I would agree with that.
I'm conscious of that.
I live in Balaklava, and I drove to Gladstone for 5 years, and that was an hour and 15 minutes each way. And then I'm now back at Balaklava as principal, and I do not shop in the local supermarket because people will go, oh, I've got you. I was going to make an appointment, but I've got you now. And you go, no, you don't. And you have to be the one to go, oh, okay, sure. And so it was actually pretty attractive living and working in different towns.
Yeah, good point. Great.
That's interesting, that living in the local community one, because sometimes it's unavoidable, but that's the strategies you have to mitigate that. I was an assistant. I was an assistant principal at Blackwood High School, and I was in a middle school behaviour management role. And I still live up in Blackwood, and I don't teach at that school anymore. And I still go to the Blair Hotel, if you know the Blair Hotel. Sometimes I go in the front bar on Friday night, sometimes not often, and watch the footy with my mates. And there's a classic one where a 18-year-old, we're both cheering at the. It's just a bit of a story, sorry, it's not a big old one. But cheering after the Crows kick the goal, and then someone turns to me, holy shit, it's Mr. Duguid! Like, those things happen, and sometimes it's okay. But sometimes it's not. Depends, depends, doesn't it?
That's actually country life. There are lots of things like that where you are drinking in the same place and seeing things. Yeah. So I guess you have to be careful about that. That is a complexity.
Be careful about it, I suppose. And I was thinking about in terms of drive and the drive-by, I was thinking about just in terms of getting the vibe and seeing the school and finding out about what it looks like and what the sense of it is and what you can feel about the school and what that might be an opportunity to think about what you might say throughout the process. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's what I was thinking of with the drive too.
Great. Thank you. Good question. Any other thoughts? Okay, let's move on to the next one around the consulting referees. Let's start with Craig.
Great, thanks.
Well, anyone who wants to
no. Well,
on the spot, but
I guess it's a bit obvious, but unfortunately, sometimes it happens that people don't let you know that you're their referee. So please talk to your referees, let them know, and then let them know why that you think they'd be a good referee. And these are the examples I think you could talk to. Provide copies of your application and your CV so that they're not going in blind. And I always ask that of referees. I say, great, I'm happy to be a referee because I can talk about these things. Are there other things you think I should know about it and talk about it? What's the position? Send me the job and person specification and your application so that I can be a good referee. So supporting your referee to be a good referee would be a tip there. Choose them carefully. You don't have to set and forget with referees. Sometimes I think we get into a bit of a habit of just having referees because that's who we've had, but then they might not be the most appropriate referees for the position. And then school them up, give them the insight to the position so that they can be the best referee for you. There's nothing worse than when you ring a referee and they go, oh. So, and I'm not sure if you've ever had that experience, but when that happens, something happens in your brain as a panel chairperson to think, why have they done that?
Great, thank you.
That'd be comments.
Anthony, thank you.
Yeah, in fact, I actually make a point of telling the panel that the referee, I wasn't asked to be a referee, so therefore I'm not as well prepared as I should be. But that also tells the panel something about the person that's applying as well. So firstly I find it impolite that you're listed as a referee and you're not told, and you're not given an application, and you haven't got that, because it actually puts you in a compromising position, and you're expected to talk positively about a person who you may know, but you don't have the context of what you're talking about. So I actually find that a little bit impolite. I think referees need to be really strategic. I think choosing different referees for different jobs is a really important thing, and because some referees can talk really well about this aspect of your work, and other referees can talk about something really well about that aspect of your work. And if that aspect of your work is really important for this position, then you need to have that person as your referee. The system requires us to put line managers in as referee. But what I've seen lots on in people's CVs is they list their referee and they say, this person can talk about this person can talk about that. So if the panel's going, we need to get confirmation of this bit, they'll pick the referee that you're telling them to pick. So I think that's a really good strategy to take. But you need to be really strategic. Don't just use the same referees over and over. I've had applicants that referees, and the referee goes, oh, I haven't worked with them for 8 years, but this is what I know. That's not very clever.
Yeah, great, thank you.
I think that last point is particularly important because, I mean, if you're applying for a principal's position, then we would expect, if you're a principal now, that you would have your education director and so on there. So, yeah, make sure that you are clear about who can talk about what. And if you do have a line manager that has only recently become your line manager, then it's really valuable for you to provide them with some information. So, you know, it's likely that you might get a call. I really appreciate you being my referee, and if you're looking for examples about, here's some examples, and send them to them so that they've got it and it's fresh in their mind. So I think that's a particularly valuable piece of work. Yeah, that would be my tip, to make sure that you have them really well schooled up, and some very practical examples. We'll talk about the interview and application, but what panels are mostly looking for is evidence of what you've done and the outcomes you've achieved. So if your referee is able to back that up, then that's particularly powerful.
Yeah, going last is bad, because you've said all
That's right.
said all of the things. No, my two things have already been said, but it is to list on your CV who can talk about what. I think that is really powerful. And don't make the panel work for it. Don't make the panel ring somebody and then have them go, oh, actually, I can't do that, and have to ring somebody else. That's, yeah, not great. And yeah, schooling up your referees. Also, don't make life hard for them. You want these people to be able to speak really well about you and what you've done. And if they are put on the spot and they don't know, they're not going to do a great job. And also, you forget. Like, I don't remember everything that people in my school have done. So please make my life easier, because then I will speak better for you.
Yeah.
So that would be my two.
Referees are a pretty important part of the process.
Huge.
Panels do place a lot of credibility on what referees say, and that's a really important part of the process.
That's good to
They know you and your work.
It's a particularly key part, isn't it?
Yeah. And particularly for any level of leadership, or you think no matter what level? I
think no matter what.
Yeah,
I think you need to be really strategic. And I think that as you get into more of the executive leadership, your potential referees start to narrow down. Because when you're applying for a B1 job, you've probably got a broader range of referees you can access. But as you go up into the executive leadership roles, the actual number of referees you can choose actually narrows down quite a lot. So you need to be really careful about who you're working with and who you're talking to about your work, so that they can referee properly.
So, some questions. Maybe we should introduce ourselves.
That'd be good. Yeah.
Alright, I'm Larissa and I'm from CB High School. I've got a question. Do you always notify the applicant that you're about to call the referee, or is it just that you've moved on to the next stage type thing and then we'll be calling referees on these days, or is it just we've sort of looked at and then we'll make the calls as you see fit. So,
So
good question.
in the process, you can ring a referee at any time throughout the process. So you could do that if you're deciding who to shortlist and we're not sure. You might ring and get a bit more information from there. And I rarely tell applicants I'm ringing referees.
No. When you apply for a position and you submitted your application, tell your referees that.
Yeah.
That's at the point that you let them know that they're a referee and they could be contacted at some point.
Yeah.
I think it's important to know that from the get-go. It's not waiting until you've had your interview.
Yep.
The referees can be contacted. It can be. Here's the application. If we're looking to shortlist and we've got all these people, we want to narrow it down to manage this, then referees can be contacted at that point in time.
Yeah. And if you're nervous about telling your referee that you're applying for a position,
talk this through.
Then maybe I think it's a really good conversation to have about why you're applying for the position, because sometimes people get nervous about telling their line manager that they're applying for a position because they think their line manager is going to get upset with them. I think it's really important that your line manager is there to support your leadership growth. And I know that different people do this differently, but I think that conversation leading up to applying for a position and then applying for a position needs to be really open and honest with your line managers and your referees. You're not being a traitor to anybody. You're looking after your own professional well-being, and I think it's really important that you have that conversation so that there's no surprises and you don't have to sort of go, timidly to them and go, "I've actually applied for this job and you're my referee."
And that may then inform future conversations
Yeah.
you have with the line manager about your professional growth and your interest in your career progressing.
Yeah.
And also just on that as well, the panel can go to a referee once, or they might go to them twice, or they might go to 2 or 3 different referees. So any number of your referees could be contacted at any point in time and more than once.
Yeah.
So just be conscious of that, right? As Jane said, right from the start, that people know that that's happening.
You've done your job as a panel chair or panel member when the person who's giving the referee statement that says something like, "Oh, I feel like I'm applying for the job." They've had to say all these things, good things about you and the processes, and etc. So it can be rigorous. Yeah, it's a rigorous part of the process, I reckon.
Would any of you be prepared to share some sort of questions that you ask a referee, or is that? Obviously it's not about individuals.
Yeah. I often ask questions, particularly for B3 and above leadership. Questions about vision and that sort of thing, because I think it's really when you're getting into that level of leadership, you need to have a broad aspect of school operations. You need to have an understanding of the broader aspect of school operations. I think when and I'm not being disparaging here, but when you're a Band 1 curriculum leader, you've got a very narrow role and a very narrow perspective of how the school operates. But as you get into more executive leadership, you need a much broader aspect, a much broader picture of how the school operates. And so often there'll be a conversation around, what's your vision for the role? How do you think, this role will contribute to the school? And that's really challenging for people, but it also gives the panel a really good perspective about their view of school operations and how they can contribute to it.
How would that translate into a question you'd ask the referee?
As a referee, ask a referee.
Because I was thinking,
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about
ask them about what this person's going
No.
to do in their job. You're going to
No.
ask them around in their current job.
Correct.
Yeah.
You could ask about their systemic view, their overall vision and understanding of the broader school rather than just a narrow. And it's not disrespectful at all. Like a B1 does have one focus.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
the job is. So.
I often ask questions that are related to the role, depending on the type of role. I really want to know how people work with others, of course, and how they interact positively, empathetically, those sort of things, constructively, build the capacity of others, those type of questions related to the role, if it's at a more middle leader role. Then obviously the capacity to manage difficulty and complexity, more senior positions and critical incidents and that type of situation.
Yeah.
Give an
And
example.
yeah, give an example of
Yeah.
how this person is managed and what
Yeah.
happened and how did they support the
So in
team.
preparing
Yeah.
your referee, you would say, here's some examples
Mm.
of where I've managed such
Yeah.
and such that
That's
you might be able to
Yeah.
share with them.
Yeah. Or when you've led an initiative, regardless of how big or how small that initiative is, and dealt with resistance. Because often people forget about that bit because people tell us all about the positive stuff that they're doing and the positive outcomes. But often people will, in their applications, forget about, oh, I actually had to deal with this person differently and I had to deal with that person differently and this person wasn't getting on board at all, so I had to do this. And you run out of words in your application to write that, but your referees can really support that.
I wonder if they omit it or if they think incorrectly, you don't want to hear that I had trouble.
Yeah.
You want to hear that everything was great and everyone was on board. So, whereas really it's more powerful to say not everyone was on board. But here's how we
It was really
move
difficult,
forward.
and this is what happened.
Yeah.
Just from those last 2 points, I think particularly in principal panels, so that's obviously my role, very much you want to know how people deal with things that don't go well.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really key aspect of it, and we want, so we often ask a question around in this person's application or an interview, we heard them talk about such and such. Can you confirm that and how they went about that process and what the outcomes were from it? So, that higher level work, it's very much about being able to be flexible, admit that not everything goes well all the time, apart from at Balaklava High School, obviously.
Full disclosure, Neil's my boss.
Really affirming those sorts of things. So that's we know that schools are complex places, and anyone that thinks that nothing's going to go wrong has not really got a picture of what it's going to be like. So those questions are often quite common as part of it, and we often ask a question: would you employ this person again?
Yeah.
And what their growth areas might be.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, growth and concerns are often common. Most of the time people haven't got concerns, but it does give the opportunity to say areas for growth sometimes identifies particular strengths as well as opportunities for growth. And the employing again gets a lot usually out of it.
Have any of you that had the experience of a referee giving a comment that was actually not supportive of the applicant?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so it does happen,
Yeah.
Well, we're looking for honesty.
Yeah.
There you go. So pick your referees carefully,
And also be truthful in your application.
Yeah.
I had one last year where I asked a question and the referee said he didn't lead that.
Right.
But in his application he had said
Right.
what a wonderful job he'd done, and they were like, no, he went, but he didn't lead any of it.
Yeah.
And so
It's a cautionary.
Yeah.
It's so hard to write about yourself, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is what we'll move on to.
Well, I have actually read my own application when I was on a panel as a chair.
Right.
oh really? So someone's copied it?
Mm.
Yeah, right. Wow.
You think they think that through.
Yeah.
But anyway.
And just while we're talking,
GTP stuff going.
and just while we're talking referees, I think it's the merit system is a powerful system and it's what we use, but it often relies on people being honest in referee statements. So this is just my plug. There's nothing gripes me more than I get a referee statement and then when I see the person that it doesn't reflect it. So here's an opportunity for us to say, be honest if you're being a referee, be honest about it, because it will come back and bite you if you're not, believe me. It might not be in the next year, but it will, won't it?
Yeah. So,
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Neil. That's a good one to finish on instead of the referee. Okay, Anthony, would you like to start talking about and sharing your hints about CVs? Interesting area.
CVs are really interesting because there is no template, there's no guide, there's no guidance anywhere on how to construct a CV. I think the CV and the written application need to work hand in hand. Don't repeat yourself. Don't make a list of stuff you've done and training you've been to, because that gives the panel no information. Talk about the roles and responsibilities that you've had, just structure it in a different way that you would to your written application. Because normally when you're applying for a job, you say, I've got this many examples to give, but I've got this much to write it in. So use them both. Obviously the prose element's quite different to the CV element, but in a CV you can actually just say something along the lines of, this was my responsibility, dot point, these are the things I did, these were the outcomes I had, and it provides a really good hand-in-hand piece to read alongside your written application. So the panel gets a really good sense of what you've achieved and what you've done.
Thank you.
Good point. I think of them as depth and breadth. So your CV gives you breadth of all the different experiences and outcomes you've achieved, and the application gives you the opportunity to give you some depth about your process, or the why, the how, and the what, what the outcomes have been. So if you think of it like that, that's particularly valuable. And as Anthony said, we don't want to see just a list of things you've done, because anybody can do them. If you've got a way of structuring it to say, here are some of the roles and responsibilities and the outcomes that I've achieved by doing that, then that's a particularly valuable piece of work that panels enjoy seeing.
Neil, could you just talk a little bit about the difference between a principal application against the principal standard versus one that's a job and person specification that's been developed?
It's a really good point, Jane, and be conscious of that you need to make sure that you're writing to the correct application. So in a principals application, it's about the 5 elements of the standard, leading the teaching and learning. I know these off by heart, done a few of them. So they're the criteria that the panel's looking at. But the panel will also know the context of the school very well. The education director is likely to have been to the school, spoken to governing council and staff or PAC, to students perhaps, and know the context. So the panel knows the context, and they're looking at the criteria in the context. So when you're talking about leading the teaching and learning, and you're applying for a school that has 70 students, that's going to look very different to if you're applying for a school of 1,000 students. So the context is key. The standards are the criteria. So be very conscious of that. And definitely what you're looking at is make sure you pitch at the correct level. The B1 level, it's about experience and your teaching and the little bits of learning and leading you've done. At a principals level, it's about leading other people and leading whole site initiatives, etc. From there. Those initiatives or those examples can come from outside of the school if it's particularly relevant, but the reality is that we're looking for how you've led in school situations. And how you've influenced a broader area than a particular subject area.
It's really important to pick up on, I think, because the first time I wrote a principal application freaked me out, really, to be quite honest, because it was a totally different approach, different approach. So I think your comment around the criteria in the context, you were writing to the context and what you will bring to that context. The conversations that the education director has with governing council, with the staff and other people in the community will really be informative in relation to that, because they're talking about the kind of principle that they want.
That's correct. And remembering the panel will have a governing council or a community rep, a staff rep, a peer rep, and the ED as the chair.
Yeah, a little bit overwhelming when you walk into that room, but yes.
And a panel that runs well, each of those people have a good say in the conversation. So if you start talking, education speak, which we can get into when we're nervous, the governing council rep can sometimes get lost in it. So just be conscious of who the audience is, and it is a very different panel to a deputy assistant principal or a B1 panel. So be very, very conscious of that.
And you mean conscious of the audience in terms of when they're reading your CV or when they're reading your application as well as when you're in the interview?
Yeah, absolutely.
Around the use of language?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sonia?
Setting up my CV, when I was going for Band B positions, I set it up very differently. With going for a principal position, I actually set my CV up under the 5 headings as well. Made it hopefully easy for the panel to be able to find that extra information there. And it's like we tell kids in school, don't make it hard for the markers, don't make it hard for the panel either. Label it clearly. I think the CV is a great place to put any data that you haven't managed to put in your application. And the other thing that is important to know as well is that you have 3,000 words, you don't have to spend them 1,500 and 1,500. So I tend to do about 2,000 for a principal application, 2,000 for the principal application, and then 1,000 in the CV. So you can be a bit flexible there with that, because I think for me the prose section is more powerful than the dot point section, but both are very important.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah.
Anything?
Lists, no lists, please. You know that already though. And if you're going to write about PD, unless it's directly connected to the selection criteria or shows evidence of something to do with the job, why would you include it? So the lists of things don't serve any purpose. We've already said it.
You mean PD that you participate
Yeah. What's the point of it unless it relates directly to the selection criteria? So
You attended.
yeah, it just means you went. Great.
Yeah.
So yeah, that bit about the opportunity to show further evidence of the selection criteria and being explicit about that. So like Sonia just said, around writing under the standards within a principal application, in deputy application, always under the role I had. So this is the role I had at this time, and these are the things I did related to the selection criteria, just explicitly. So picking those up and putting them in the CV, the words from the selection criteria, so that making it easy for the marker thing, so that people, that's an evidence of the criteria. So that's something in there. Yeah, I think everything else has been said.
Thank you. Are there any questions about the CV or reflections?
Hi, my name's Linda. I'm also at CV High School, just in B1 roles at the moment. So I guess my question around CV is how much focus should I be dedicating to future language in this role? I believe a strong candidate would need, and therefore I demonstrate through this, or is it purely just what I have done? Is it a nice little mix?
Can I just start by saying never say just a B1? In lots of contexts, they're the hardest jobs in the school. So never say just a B1.
You're the closest to the teachers and the most important leaders in the school.
You're the ones that drive the improvement in the school.
Yeah.
Right? So I think a blend of both is my view. I think there's a place for saying I have, and there's a place for saying I will. And if you can connect the I will with stuff that you've done already, then that's really powerful.
It's a good balance, yeah.
Matthew from the School of Languages. Would you put quotes in an application? Are they helpful?
Quotes that people have said about you?
Yeah, so it could be maybe your line manager has said, or maybe you've had some feedback from parents or something like that, specific quotes.
I've never done it personally.
I've seen it in applications.
I've seen it in applications.
It needs to be, it's a bit, again, English teacher, needs to be powerful. Don't just give me, a rambling thing, but if it's something short and punchy, I wouldn't be opposed to it.
It's part of the suite of evidence that you have about your skills. So that feedback is as much evidence as statistical data. I think you just need to be a little bit more careful about how you use it, and maybe a little bit more sparing. Than
Yep.
In a CV or written the application piece, do you think?
Either. Yeah.
I've
I've seen it in both.
Yeah.
I think I'd be worried if I just saw a whole heap of quotes.
Yeah.
Be that.
Good. Yeah.
be very careful about how much you use it, and the further you go up the ladder in terms of positions, we don't see a lot of quotes in principal applications, and if you're going to see them, they need to be really targeted and from someone that has credibility as well, and very much related to whatever it is you're trying to explain. So you're not a no-no, but just very much in context.
Yeah.
In terms of outcomes, include evidence of that in your CV as well?
Yeah,
And
where
then-
possible, yeah.
I
Wherever
think that's
you
the
can.
place to put any data that you haven't managed to put
Yeah.
in your application.
You won't be able to do the whole process, but this is what it was. This is how I did it briefly. This was the outcome related to criteria. I think it's a good thing to do.
The referee can always follow up, like the panel can follow up with the referee or ask him an interview or something if they want anymore.
Yes.
I know you said don't list your PDs, but if you are like accredited and your qualifications, we're still listing that on the CVs?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And if not PD, if it's related to the role and relevant and can show evidence of. So why would you list? So if a school was doing Berry Street education model, and you had done that at your school, you'd done the training. That's good, but what did you do about the training on what we're doing? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Should we move on to the application, please, Anthony?
I write my applications really differently to most people. I don't block them under headings. I write a single story. So my application for my current role, I actually only told one story for my whole application, my whole written application, but it included all the principal standards. So the way I do that is I find that writing in those block headings under the essential criteria, you tend to repeat yourself or you overlap stories and stuff like that. If you've got a really strong example that you can tell a story, that you can pull bits of the different essential criteria into that, I would tell that story and then use bolding and specific words from the essential criteria to say, well, this is the bit that you're reading right now for the panel. So you're actually making it easy for the panel to pick the information out, but you're not disrupting your example under a specific heading, if that makes sense. So the way, and I've been writing my application like that since my first deputy's position that I won. And I find it, for me, it works really, really well. And what it does, it actually enables me to give the panel a flavour of who I am. Because often you get applications that are really clinical, and we go, I've got no idea who this person is. I've got no idea how they work. I've got no idea, whether they'll fit in the team or whether they can work really well with the team. So you've got to put a bit of a flavour of who you are in there as well.
That's good advice, thank you.
One of the great things about the merit process is that there is no right or wrong way of writing an application. So this is a great example, because some people would never go down that track. But it is really, I think, Anthony's point around having allowing the panel to know who you are and what's really important to you is particularly valuable. So what I would say though is whatever style you use, make sure that you have the reason why you've done something. So is it about data? Is it about a conversation you've had with government council? So the why, the process, and the outcomes. People are really good at saying, I did this, I did this, I did this. They're not so good at saying why they did it, and they're terrible at saying what the outcomes have been. I would see that all the time when I see draft applications. Don't forget your outcomes. So whatever style, make sure you have those elements within it. And my other suggestion would be to use less examples and be really deep about them. And use your CV as the opportunity to show your breadth.
Yeah, that's good. Very good advice. Thank you. Sonia.
And outcomes are the most important thing that I look for in an application. I like someone to tell me a story. Like, I like to get a bit of a sense, but I also want to see what happened. I mean, you could have had the most fabulous program or whatever, but if it didn't change student learning outcomes, who cares? From there. So outcomes, I look for that outcomes, as Anthony said, it doesn't have to be statistics and numbers. It can be, a bit more of the qualitative as opposed to the quantitative. I worked with Dean Angus for a while, and he used to say, what, so what, now what? And that's what he was looking for. What was the situation? So what happened after you did that? And then now what? Now what's changed as a result of those things that you've done? And so that's just something easy that has stuck in my head, what, so what, and now what?
And now what's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And also, sorry, one last thing. I would also, in terms of the projection into the role, I would be projecting in my application as well. These are skills and abilities that I would bring to your school and continue the literacy work, the behaviour, the whatever the relevant thing is. So I think if I was reading an application and there was no projection in there, I'd be a little bit concerned that you hadn't actually thought about my site and what our needs are and what our focus is. So I would definitely do some projecting in the application.
And that's where the context is particularly valuable, isn't it?
Yep.
Where you know the school and they can see the projection into the context of this school taking these skills.
And the school's strategic directions that they want to head with that leadership role.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So to reinforce, I think what other people have said, the what, the why, the who, the how, then the outcome, and the so what bit. Often I find when I'm reading and looking for the outcome, looking for the evidence and trying to dig for it, and if I find myself asking so what, then I think that's when I've got a bit of a concern. So what? How did you know? How did you know it happened? What did you do as a result? I guess that might be the what next or now what. And then talked about thinking about the evidence and the nature of the evidence and the types of evidence you've got, and you've got data, of course, and you've got improved learning outcomes or wellbeing outcomes, and the WEC and the RADA-RAs and the DADA-DAs, you know them all, the data sets. But that other nature of that, the more qualitative is sometimes difficult, and how you talk about the impact on others and how others are brought along, I think sometimes is good to know, because it gives you an insight into the person. Because I think it is hard to write, through an application to get people to get a sense of who you are and what you're about. So I think that is quite difficult. I could never write a story. I could never do that. So I guess it's trying to work out what works for you, and I definitely write.
You can get GP Chat to write for you.
Maybe, true. But then we can ask GP Chat, did you write this? I think knowing your own style and working out your own style and working within that would be it's obviously really important.
Yeah, don't try and write like somebody else.
No.
Can I just, in terms of examples, I think sometimes you're in a role and you're in the middle of an initiative and it's chugging along and you know it's going to have a really good outcome, but the job comes up, your dream job comes up and you go, damn it, I haven't finished yet. It's okay to put that as an example in there, or something that you've done and it's failed. There's nothing wrong with putting that in there, because then that demonstrates you as a reflective leader as well. So
if you reflect on
it didn't work, and so next time we might do this, or it could have, we can improve by. So I think don't be afraid to put stuff in that hasn't particularly worked, or that you haven't seen the final outcome for yet, because sometimes it takes years to get to a final outcome, and I think there's nothing wrong with you saying, well, we haven't achieved that point yet, or it hasn't fully embedded yet, but this is what we're expecting.
I'd be interested in the rest of the panel members' comments around this, but around I statements. So I think you have to be careful about how many times you use I led or I did or I initiated, etc. Because it can get a little bit, I think it can get a bit, it's all about me. So we're definitely looking for how you work collaboratively, and you can still initiate collaboration, that's fantastic. But just be conscious about the I, so I'm not sure what the rest of the people feel about that.
We had that discussion before we started tonight, and said, some of it is I, or my role was,
yes,
but no man is an I.
So my role is a particularly valuable piece of starting point, so that people get to see that you can lead, that you can work collaboratively, and that you can be part of a team and not have the final say on everything as well. So getting that mix of collaboration and initiation, really important.
Language like our, we, that's inclusive. The team. Especially the more senior role you go, obviously you can't do everything. So how did you delegate, and how did you work with that team, and how did you empower people and give the resources, and then
capacity building for others.
How did you build the capacity of those awesome middle leaders who work right with the team? All those examples.
I've actually sat on a panel as a peer, and the chair went through the application and counted the number of I statements in there, and said this person is not a team player. That was it. Boom. So, and that was a long time ago. That person's not working in our system anymore. But that for them, that basically, as a chair, that had written that person off because there was way too many I statements in that application.
There's a real tension, isn't it? Because we're not good at putting ourselves forward. So when we are asked to do that, how do we do that enough to show that leadership that you're looking for as a panel member, but also acknowledge the work that you've done as part of that team. So it's something that you need to be quite skilled at, and your referee can support you, obviously. In that space. And
these positions are called leadership for a reason. They're not management; they're leadership, and so that means you're leading people. So you need to, demonstrate your skills, but you also need to say, "I can lead people. I can take a group of people, sell my vision and take them along a journey with me," because that's what leadership is.
That's a great point. As a principal, when we're doing principal panels, we also want to know that you can manage a school and do the budget, etc. You don't need to make a big deal of it, but you certainly need to be really conscious of that. So that we need to know that you're not going to send the school bankrupt for a start, because that's way too much paperwork for the education.
That kind of leads to something I was going to ask the panel, and that is around the OH&S criteria. Have you got any advice or tips around how you do that? Because you've got to address it, but yes, I'm on the committee, or yes,
How you apply it, I think often I get people to keep it short, but how did you apply that? Or the understanding of those, rather than just, I understand a practical example. It might be in when you were leading something and you had to have that lens for these reasons. And it's one we have to do.
It's one of those tick ones, like the mannequins, the tick ones. You've got to be sure, actually.
I guess in the more senior roles it becomes more, because of compliance reasons and your obligations, it becomes a little bit more obvious to say that you've done the stars and the other requirements, so you can tick it that way. But I think how you apply those things briefly would be a suggestion.
Depending on the role, I think you can actually spin it to the role. So if you're going for a curriculum leader's position, you can talk about risk assessments and things like that in terms of the context of curriculum. If you're in a year level wellbeing, you can talk about safe classrooms and behaviour and stuff like that. If you put it in context, it doesn't have to be. Should only be about 3 or 4 sentences at most, because you've got so many other things to put in there. But it should be contextual to what you're applying for, so that the panel can go, because it's probably the worst bit of any application that I ever read, is that for a lot of people they omit it almost altogether, which can work against you in a process, because it is one of the essential criteria. So contextualise it to the type of position.
Good advice. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Are there some questions or thoughts? Again,
More out of interest, have you ever had a candidate not be selected because they exceeded the set word count?
Only if it gets ridiculous and obvious and
Yeah.
painful. So if it's not beyond the pale, then I wouldn't be counting words. So
Yeah.
you know when it's too much because the font's crazy. You can't read it. It's 5 pages long. I think I take a bit of a pragmatic approach as a panel and what's reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's obviously out of control, then you can't communicate succinctly and clearly. It's a communication issue then.
That's
Yeah.
correct. That's
Yeah.
the big
Yeah, and I look at it in terms of equity, because if a person's written 3,500 words and the rest of the candidates have written 1,500, how much advantage are they getting in the process to that? And I think it's an unfair advantage, and that's when I discuss with the panel work. You know, this person's getting an unfair advantage because they've got this many more words. Generally, it's waffle anyway, but
Yeah, that's it.
but I think it's an equity issue in that context, and I think that's unfair. It's a bit like, you know, when you, for ancillary positions, you ask for a CV and you get a written statement and a CV of, you know, 10 pages long, and you go, well, this isn't fair. So I think it's an equity issue. It's also about your ability to follow instructions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Any other thoughts? It is a bit contentious, so good question.
Yeah. In most cases, the panel will read
Yeah.
something longer than 1,500 words, and I think the instructions in the merit process are that you read the application, but the panel then needs to consider whether that application is a fair application, or, you know, is not too long.
Got another question.
Of course.
When you're projecting into the role, do you project through that cover letter, and that's where you're bringing out, the school review, the SIB, and how your skill set works in that space, and then with the selection criteria, do you more around your solid examples with outcomes, or is a cover letter needed?
I don't think cover letters are a good idea
No, I agree.
because they're not necessarily part of the process.
Okay.
I'd be projecting it initially in the application, and then if it does make sense to within the evidence, within the examples and evidence to connect into the role, then I do it in both spots. Whatever makes sense, I think.
Yeah, and it just occurred to me, the job and person spec for Band B leaders, there is desired outcomes
Yep.
and what the role statement is. Don't ignore that bit. I think a lot of people go to the essential criteria and write to the essential criteria madly, but look at the role statement and look at the outcomes and actually link that to your context of your application. They're really important. The principal or the PAC, whoever's constructed the JMP, have spent a lot of time going, this is what the job's going to look like and this is what I want from the job. I think it's really important that you connect to those bits as much as you can.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the uniqueness of the Department for Education's process. The cover letters might be something that we use in other sectors or even other jobs, but it's not something that's been part of our merit selection process.
And it's really obvious that people that aren't in the Department for Education are seriously disadvantaged by the process because they haven't got the nuances of having worked through that. And so generally the people that apply for the first time for a Department for Education job, their application resembles nothing like what it needs to actually even get shortlisted. And then the feedback stuff has got to be really important for them.
Yes.
Because it's not, it's fair that they get proper feedback that says, we understand that this process is really different and this is how it should look.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Can I just say something on feedback as well?
Yeah.
Don't think it fits under any of the other headings. If you are unsuccessful, I think it is really important that you ask for feedback to find out why you are unsuccessful, things that you can improve on next time. I would strongly encourage you. Hopefully you're all successful and you don't need to. But I would, you'd be foolish not to. It's an opportunity to learn.
We've all been there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find feedback much better through a conversation if you can get that, because you can get much more depth than written feedback.
Yeah, and asking for feedback and demanding it are different things.
Is this true?
So
Yeah.
be careful about how you ask for it, and if the referee says, yeah, no worries, give me a call at this time, or I'll give you a call at this time, and then you write back and say, no, I need it in writing. I'll give you a call. Should I? It's just because it's not a requirement to provide written feedback. So there's just be sensitive with the feedback process, I suppose is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's good. We can talk more about some of these other aspects too. But let's move on to interviews, unless there's any other questions or thoughts that you have about the written bit. Okay. Well, where are we up to? Neil, it must be your turn to start.
That's very appropriate, Jan. I've just come from a panel with interviews today. So here's my key point from today's experience is try not to waffle, honestly. So be clear about your thinking. There's probably 100 different things we'll talk about here, but I'll just pick out a couple.
Yeah.
So try and be really clear and precise in the answers that you give. Don't be afraid to take a breath, take a glass of water and have a sip and think. No panel is going to see that as a bad thing, because we all know that the interviews, you're nervous. Doesn't matter how many times you've done it, you will be nervous, and we expect that. So don't be frightened to take a little time and clear your thinking, and then be as precise and as clear as you can when you're answering the questions. If you feel yourself going off track, stop, ask for the question again, and come back to it, because I know it drives me crazy if we hear a 15-minute answer and there's only 1 or 2 points in it. So be really clear and precise as much as you possibly can. And don't forget, don't be frightened to stop and ask for the question again, so that you do stay on track. I actually think that it's an example of people being sensible and clear and precise around their work. If they've gone, hang on, I'm off track here, I'm coming back. Yeah. The other part I think that's really important is to provide an example, if you can, preferably different to what you've done in your application. That might be tricky. If you can, that's better. But if you can't, then you're expanding and giving different information and potentially providing a bit more detail in that answer if you're using the same example. Once again, don't forget the outcomes in that circumstance. So there'll be my 2 points, and we'll see what else. Says. I don't want to take all of your thunder. I know that you can talk.
Not untrue. I prepare for interviews. When I was going for Band B positions, I would anticipate what questions that they might ask me. I would speak to people who've been on other panels and say, what sort of questions did you have? And then I would not practice, but I would have them as headings and write some dot points. What would I say if I was given that question in an interview? You can take things with you. So if you have got some things prepared, I wouldn't be reading an answer, but it's, again, no shame in asking for a question to be repeated, no shame in just, flicking through your folder or whatever that you've got. There's some notes that you can refer to, because as Neil said, you'll be nervous. And when you're nervous, you forget, and you walk out and you go, damn it, why didn't I say, or why did I say, or whatever. So I think anticipating, because there are some questions that you probably can anticipate in any position. So I think spending some time doing that, that's also where you can put your outcomes there to remind you of what you did and then what happened. From there, so I think that's good. It's also an opportunity to project once again, and say this is what you did there, and in this role, I would do something similar, or I would do it differently for your context. I know you mentioned Berry Street before. We've done a lot of trauma work at our school, and if you know that that's the lens, be really targeted in that, and definitely don't be afraid to take a breath as well. jot some notes down. You could jot some notes when you get the question. Don't be afraid to do that because it just clears your thinking and just gives you a minute just to take that beat before you just start waffling potentially.
You mean if the question's asked in the interview itself?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes you get the questions before.
Yeah.
That's right. Sometimes it's a mix.
Yeah.
I think it's okay in the interview to take some notes
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah, the pausing bit and then showing that you're taking a thoughtful approach and not just saying the first thing that comes into mind. I think it's actually a strength that someone can hold the silence in an interview. I reckon that's really quite powerful sometimes, just to be comfortable in that just for a little bit. You wouldn't take 5 minutes, but one or two. It's quite powerful, I think.
The opposite.
Yeah, that's right. The taking something in to present to the panel, be careful about that. If it's it has to be clear and succinct and tight and one page, and really clear and connected to what you're saying, and then just don't restate what's on the bit of paper. So show how that supports what you're saying and refer to it. The higher executive leadership positions will pretty much guaranteed, I think, talk about vision and what for the school, for the site, for the role. I think there's a lot of that sort of, so you can project into that. You might be asked to prepare for that as well. And then complexity will be often asked about complex situations and how you managed and to support the process and made sure everyone was safe and well to the best of your ability, all those things. Definitely being open-minded about the interview and that they really want to meet you, and that's a good thing that you've got an interview and that you're progressing. Yeah, so you're in. Once you've got an interview, you're in the process. That's for sure. And so letting the panel know about how pleased you are without being hopefully effusive about it, but just wow, this is cool, isn't it? I'm really, I'm pleased to be here and great to meet you and I'm really excited about the opportunity and the things to do there. In an interview as a panel member, I often ask, why do you want the job? Why do you want to be here? What is it about? What is it about this job in our school that appeals to you? Sometimes that stumps people, and I'm a bit worried about that. If you haven't really thought about why you really want this job, why you really want to come to our school and make a contribution to our community, then I get a bit worried about that.
I was going to ask the panel about how panels come up with their questions and what typical questions. So that's a good example. But perhaps we'll give an answer.
Yeah. For me, the interview is all about your pre-preparation. Your brain's a beautiful thing, but when you're under stress and you're in your fight and flight mode, your logic and reasoning parts of your brain completely shut off. So it's really hard to remember stuff, really hard to piece together coherent conversation. And so if you're one of those people that gets really stressed in an interview, then the reason you're struggling is because your brain really just wants you to run away. So the preparation stuff for me is really, really important. I think you can predict questions around resistance and conflict and curriculum and teamwork and things like that. You can predict that. Generally, panels ask questions like that. And then the vision question as well. If you go into an interview where, particularly executive leadership, where you probably would expect a vision question, you should have sat down the week before or 2 weeks before or however long you've had since you've found out you've got an interview, and gone, this is what I think my role looks like and this is what I think I can do. The school might have a very different view of that, but what it shows them is that you've got that broad perspective about schooling and what it might look like. And what I did, I would create like a one-page sort of infographic thing for myself, just so that I could look at it and my brain would go, okay, I remember that now, because my brain would just go whoosh. So it was really important for me to have those dot points, and you can bring whatever you like into the interview. Like if you've got a folder this thick, That's okay. Just when you get the unseen questions, you can just go, right, it's on this page. I can look at the dot points and away you go. And it just takes all that brain fog out of the way. And use your time well. The number of times I've seen people in an interview get their first, so maybe they had a preparation question that they had 10 minutes to prepare, and they go chugging along, and you go, I just need to stop you there. We've got 5 minutes left and we've got 2 more questions for you. I've done that on numerous occasions, because even though the person's in the interview, they're clearly nervous, they're not watching the clock, because you'll always have a clock. And if you haven't got a clock, ask for a clock. Or have something close by so you can manage your time. I think it's really important that you structure that time, because you don't know what the other questions are going to be if they're unseen questions, and you don't know how long it's going to take you to answer them, so you really need to be strategic about how you go about that.
So what I hear you saying is you wouldn't be relying on the chair to manage that time necessarily.
No,
Some
absolutely
chairs
not.
Will, but not all chairs
No.
will actually manage that time. So
No,
I don't know.
that's part of the test,
Yeah.
Jane.
That's all maybe this part of it. Have other people had some suggestions or thoughts around the interview or time management within an interview, things that you've done or strategies that you've seen that have worked? Because that's really tricky. Actually. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. And then go. Yeah.
Anthony, I'm wondering, do you give them up front that there are going to be 3 questions?
Yes, absolutely.
So,
Yep.
So, and even maybe have a discussion about the management of time, like this will be 30 minutes.
Yep.
You might like to give some
So
information on how
in
long you're going to spend.
in the email, it would say the interview will be 1 seen question, 2 unseen questions. That'll be in the email, so make sure you read the email really carefully. I've had people go to the wrong side. I've been down at the Willunga Primary School and they've gone Willunga High School for their interview. The other bit, and at the beginning of the interview, I will say you've got 30 minutes, there's 3 questions, the time is your own to do as you choose. Here's the clock, we'll start when you're ready. So those instructions will come to you, is to make sure that you just listen to them.
Yeah. Thank you. Good question.
Sorry, I'm new to my I was just going to say that I often do a presentation with the sample improvements to show, and I'll put like the school colours and the school motto in it, just little things like that, and then also it really clarifies my thinking and takes away the nerves, because I'm presenting and it's all there and it's visual for them and they're engaged, and I've had lots of positive feedback from the times I've taken.
Yeah.
I guess if it suits your personal style and your strength, and you can present your best self in that way, then definitely do it. Wouldn't work for me, so I wouldn't. I wouldn't try that. But yeah, if it works for you and you think you put your best self forward, then go for it.
But just make sure you tell the panel chair that you need a presentation device before you get there.
No, that's correct.
That's very important. Yeah.
Someone told me once with an infographic kind of an idea, the 1-page infographic, and found that really useful, starting out with the job role and the outcomes to get that, and what you do to do the outcomes. It spreads out and gets to the nitty-gritty of what you've actually done. And I find that will keep me on track to the outcomes. That's the centre of everything. And just having that, because I struggle to read dot points. I'm panicking, but the infographic helps.
Yeah. And again, it's tailored into what works for you in that moment of stress. You know, what's going to make sense to me?
Yeah, even though you're nervous, panels just want to see the best version of the person. So they'll do everything they can to chill people out. But we really, in the end, you have to work with, you do things that you know you're going to try and present the best version of yourself.
And I think sometimes the panel will prompt you as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can actually remember Neil prompting me in my interview for the principal position that I've won now. He said, you've talked about whatever, but can you tell us a bit more about this? And I can still remember saying, actually, I've written that down here. Thanks for reminding me to get back on track, because you do sort of, waffle. So sometimes the panel will bring you back as well, but I tend to do the whole 30 minutes, the time is yours to manage. But don't panic if the panel asks you to clarify something. It really is them trying to see the best version of you.
Yeah, and sometimes people get really nervous and they answer all the questions in about half the time of the interview.
Yeah.
That's where the panel will start to try to elicit a bit more information, because you don't want to see people walk out and go, "Oh, that was a disaster." If the panel can, without telling you what to say, elicit a bit more information, they'll do that.
Panels will structure this in lots of different ways, won't they? Some say it's just going to be a conversation. So we sit around the table, we're going to chat and throw some questions out there, But there might also be that, here's the formal questions, we want you to bring a presentation. So it can be a whole range of different strategies that panels will use, depending on how they want to manage that. But there's often is there anything else you'd like to say, question at the end? Have you got any thoughts on what works? A tip or something you've seen that's been fabulous, or no, when will I find out is the question, which is fair enough thing to ask, actually, to be honest. But is there anything else that, in terms of that final pitch? They're about to walk out the door? Or is it just...
No, I always ask that question at the end. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us that you haven't had the opportunity to do so? And yes, sometimes it's, no, I think I've covered everything. But that's often where I get the why they want to come to our school. If they haven't had the chance to do that, I've heard really great things about the site, can't wait, or I've looked on your website, I see you do restorative practices really well, I'm excited to be part of that. So something uplifting is a good final comment.
And uplifting would be, I know the school, I know what I'm getting into, and I really want to be
Yes,
part
definitely.
of this community.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's the last little image that you have, and remembering that the panel may find that there are 3 people or 4 people or whatever number of people that have met the criteria, and so if those 3 people have met the criteria, the panel has to go back and make a decision about who is going to be in the job. So you go through a ranking process, and so that's still based on the criteria, but it can, what's your point of difference? So if you finished off with a person that has really clearly demonstrated that they've done the research, that they're really interested in your school, they know it in detail and in depth, and there's something really sparky about that person, then that can actually help you to go up the rankings. So that's I think I really encourage you to think carefully about having a final statement, and particularly if you're going for a principal's role, what is it that would make you the best person for this role, so that that's fresh in the panel's mind when you finish.
Because that's a chance for you to say what
exactly
you want to
right.
say. Not just respond.
That's correct.
And I'll go back to the psychology of that, because there's this thing called the primacy and recency effect, that people remember the first thing you said or the first impression you made, and they'll remember the last stuff. That's the bit they'll remember most, and the rest in the middle they'll rely on their notes for. So I think it's important that firstly you set a really good impression as you walk in the door. That's a really important part of the interview, I think, because that first 15 seconds is, you've seen the ad, it takes 9 seconds to know whether you like this car or not. It's a fact. The way our bodies, our brains work, that first impression is a really important one that you manage, and you want to manage the impression that you give to the panel. And the bit that you leave on, I think, is a really bit that leaves an impression in people's minds as well. So I think that's a really important bit. And I just need to go back, because this keeps niggling away at the back of my head. With the application, don't write them on your own. Do not write them on your own. Get help. Get people to read it. Get people to proof it. Get people to give you feedback. They're not something that you lock yourself in a cave for and write. I think it's really important that you do that. Because when you write stuff, you read it and it sounds the same every time you read it, and you could be missing out 5 words in that sentence, but you read through because that's what you thought you wrote. So make sure you get people to read your stuff.
But also people say, but Anthony, why did you include a blurb? You're really good at that.
That's correct. Trusted people that know you to read it.
Well, that's it. It's quite confidential, isn't it?
Yeah.
So sharing this.
I gave a colleague feedback not long ago, which was really brutal. Like, it was brutal feedback. And that person thanked me for it because I said I needed that because I've been applying for jobs and not getting shortlisted. So I really needed that feedback. And the last one they applied for, they got shortlisted for. So obviously, it's a really important part of the process.
Okay, any thoughts, questions around the interview that we haven't already covered? Or great conversation.
Can I make a principal one as well, Jane, because it is quite different.
Okay, yes, please.
Remembering that the 4 people on the panel include a governing council person. So make sure that you're making eye contact with all of the people on the panel. And when you're talking with passion and enthusiasm about the community or the school, make sure you engage with the parent, because they're the one, they have a particularly important role in this, and they want to see the connection. So make sure that you're actually engaging with all of the people on the panel, and particularly if it's if it's around the community school passion, the governing council person, if it's around the understanding the management and operational things, you engage with the education director, etc. like that. So kind of target it a little bit, but make sure you engage with everybody, because they are particularly important pieces of work.
I'll often take it in terms and asking a question.
That's correct.
The governing council question will be something to do with.
Yeah. Why do you want to be? Why do you want this job?
Yeah. They're looking for you to care about their kids, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. Good advice. Thank you. So the behind the scenes work in being on a panel and what the work of the panel is, certainly we've got some insight into that today. I would just like to encourage you, if you haven't already been on a panel or had an opportunity to be on a
That's
panel,
a great piece of
take up that opportunity, because you really get insight into the process, and also some of the good, the bad, the ugly processes, not processes, hints that go with actually being successful in such a process. But behind the scenes, in terms of how the panel operates, is that in our concluding remarks, is there anything that you would like to share around, so how does a panel really work? They do all this work, but how do they actually end up by coming to that end process? What is it that, what process is used, what strategy is used, how does that work? Because if you haven't been on a panel, you've probably got no idea around how that works.
You've got
Do you know what I'm
collect.
asking?
I think so. So how you collect the evidence and make the decision.
Yeah. What's the process that goes on there? Yeah.
So.
Confidential.
Yeah.
Not breaking.
No. So, I've used templates as a panel chair, and have the job and first specifications, and have room for people to write notes against the criteria, and then degrees to which people met the criteria and why they're saying that. So that's part of the process. Have a conversation about the referee questions with the panel, but as a chair, often thinking about that before the panel, so that you've got some idea of what you're looking for as a chair. On being on panels, if you get the opportunity to chair them, that's when you know you're really live. That's good to be chairing the panel as well. That the opportunity to you get insight, different level of insight there for sure, and understanding the process. So that's a couple of things I thought of.
Yeah. So that template of here's our applicant one really gets all the notes at each stage of the process. Yep, and build it as we go through the process, and then for referees again have a template that we would write on. Yes. Develop the questions together, but with some thought probably as a panel chair. Yeah, no, that's good. Anything else that
I spend a lot of time prior to even forming the panel setting up indicators against the essential criteria.
Yes.
Because for me, when I go into a panel, it's really important that I get across to the panel what the person that I want in that position looks like, in terms of the skills and abilities that they have and what they're able to demonstrate in their application and interview and through the referee statement. I give that to the panel and say, look, this is a starting point, and you can chop it and change it however much you like. It most often doesn't get changed a lot, but does get changed. But then everybody's on the same page. Everybody's looking for the same stuff, and so then you don't have particular personal biases coming into play when they're looking at, you know, the distractors of applications and things like that, you know, about writing styles and spelling mistakes and you know, missing words and stuff like that, which are all the distractors that happen. You've got that sort of consistent thing that you're looking for, and you can work out whether somebody's met the criteria to a high level or or not met the criteria, or, you know, different depth.
And as the chair, that gives insight to the panel members about what you're looking for. In
Yeah.
particular.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I always use a pro forma as well. Same thing.
Right.
I'll get the job and person specification and take that one aspect or that one criteria, and then have these are some of the things that it could look like.
Yeah.
Not.
You always end up with too many, but
Yeah, that's right. Well, you do, and then you go through and you tick and cross and whatever, and then a place for comments, and then I always do well met, or not met.
Yep.
And then an overall comment at the bottom. In terms of creating questions that we ask referees and in interview, it's usually looking to have a gap filled. You know, if there's something missing in the application that's not there, we'll target a question to that. Referees don't have to be asked the same question. So you can, you know, if someone's covered something really well, but applicant B hasn't, you know, then we can ask some more digging questions from there.
And as Neil said before, you can go. I think you can go back several
Yep.
times.
Yep.
To try and get as much evidence as you possibly can.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that the job of the panel is to keep people in the process, not kick them out.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important part to remember that, you know, the panel's trying to keep you in there as best as they can.
Did you talk about the role of the peer in the panel? Because there's a peer principal, there's a peer level, B-level person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because they don't know the school, but they know
Which
the
is
level
really,
of leadership.
which is I think that's a really important aspect of the panel, because I think the context of the school, which is why I think a lot of the leadership positions are filled by people within the school, is because that context is an advantage. And it's really important that the peer is there to provide an unbiased or unknowing eye across it and go, hang on a minute, the evidence is there. Just because it's not in the same context, the evidence is actually there. And I think that's a really important aspect of the panel.
Yeah. And in principle?
Yeah, very much so. It is about understanding if it's an A2 band principal role and you've got an A2 principal there, they actually understand the operations and what's required, probably more so than the education director. So yeah, absolutely vital, because they will know the context, they will know the operational and requirements of the position, and will see it from a slightly different context, which is particularly valuable, and add that unbiased view around, you know, someone that knows the school particularly well.
Yeah, great, thank you. Are there any other questions or reflections? Now's your chance.
Mm-hmm.
What about appeals? Does anyone know about that? Appeal process? Are you good with that process? Yeah, how the VSP works in terms of generating letters, or you know all that? Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right.
We all love VSP.
VSP's the
I know.
worst.
We love working in there.
But certainly, like you have a, you have a
What's that one
right
called?
to actually access
We don't
the
have the
information that's in the VSP in terms of feedback.
Well,
that's
you're
one
true.
thing.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
But in terms of what the report has been, if you've not been in the panel and had to be a chair and write all that information in there, that's something that, in terms of the process, that is actually your right to have access to
Yep.
that information.
Yep.
Not all of it, obviously, but certainly that can be helpful as well. And if you have any concerns, it's really important to follow through with that process.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you're saying there, but I was also going to say that the panel process is a confidential process.
Yes.
And so when you're giving examples, you can actually give examples that you would not normally share in an open conversation, with the expectation that the panel is a confidential space. So while I wouldn't necessarily be, giving student details so much, but you can give specific student examples that you wouldn't necessarily talk about in an open forum, but that's a confidential space. So I think it's important to remember that.
Okay. Any final questions?
Can I have a final comment?
Oh yeah, final
Please.
comment. Yes.
Go country.
Yeah.
Don't be scared. It is not that bad. It is not that far in some instances. We're less than an hour from the city. We'll have a B4 position coming up soon. It's not that far, and that's where you'll get fabulous opportunities that you won't necessarily get in the city.
Yeah.
Concur with that.
And if you actually are brave and move to the country, it offers you a whole lifestyle. It's not just a job, it's a lifestyle. So I urge you to consider it, because I don't think you'll regret it.
Yeah. I did 7 years in Wales, and it's the best leadership building experience you can have.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the cohort of teachers is usually early career type teachers. You work hard, but the actual development you get is accelerated in those spaces.
The wraparound support in country communities is incredible.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yes.
Hamley Bridge Primary School, Saddleworth Primary School, Riverton Primary School, all coming up this year, just in case you're interested.
Also Balaklava High School, let's not forget that. I got it first.
Oh, you don't know about that one yet?
We're talking to secondary school people here, so you're talking primary school.
Yeah, don't discount it as an opportunity to achieve a different perspective on things, and an opportunity to be involved with the whole school leadership. So don't ever discount that.
It's a really important thing to know. Area school, primary school.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of positions in our portfolio that have been filled by primary people. Kulba Secondary, Ordinga, Bandi, which is
principal level,
at the principal level. So there's no reason you can't go between the two. But you need to school yourself up on the curriculum and the pedagogy. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, can I just, on your behalf, thank our panel members for the time that you've given not only to come tonight, but also in the preparation, but also in the honesty in which you've shared your response and given us some insight. Clearly, there's a lot of experience sitting here at this panel across the evening, and the expertise has been incredibly valuable. So, thank you so much, each and every one of you. Could you join me in showing your